what really caught my eye this week is that no other than Joe Rogan is leaving YouTube for Spotify.
Yeah, I saw that.
That is incredible. So for those of you, for this one person on this planet who doesn't know who Joe Rogan is, Joe Rogan is probably the world's most successful podcaster. He's a TV personality and a former TV host and martial arts commentator and so on and so forth. And he started a podcast some years ago where I think initially he was just sort of, chatting with his mates sort of thing. And has developed into the world's biggest podcast. I think he has, just to put that into perspective, so the Joe Rogan podcast has 150 million downloads per month. 150 million downloads per month. That is incredible. For some, spoken from the perspective of somebody who's just launched a little camera podcast, 150 million downloads per month is just insane. But, having said that, his podcast has been native to YouTube and, and Apple Podcasts and so on and so forth. So there's the audio versions and the video versions and so on and so forth. And that's all going to go. That's all going to go. He's moving his entire operation to Spotify.
And it was a massive deal as well, wasn't it?
100 million.
Huge.
100 million US dollars. So now this really caught my eye because I thought, well, first of all, why would you do that? What is 100 million is a lot of money, don't get me wrong. That would probably tempt most people, But I just think Spotify, an audio platform. What about all because I watch the Joe Rogan podcast, pretty regularly, I would say, and I enjoy the YouTube video version of it most of the time when I have the time, unless I listen to it in the car or something. But I would say probably the majority of the time I would probably rather watch the video, the video version of it. So get this right. So Spotify are going to build a video platform just for this podcast. That's crazy. I find that crazy. And it's not the first time this has happened. I don't know if you remember Howard Stern a few years moved his radio show to Sirius FM, and it went behind a paywall. And one of the reasons for that was that I think at the time he felt that he wasn't as restricted with Sirius. So, I think he probably felt he had more freedom in the things that he could say that way, and that may be part of the reason why Joe Rogan took this decision. I haven't spoken to him, so I don't really know. But from what I gather, there's a lot of censorship going on YouTube, particularly in relation to breach of copyright. And his content is quite controversial sometimes. And I know that he's had issues with that in the past. So this may have very well been, sort of a motivating factor. And that's at a time when Spotify are very, very heavily pushing into the world of podcasting. So I think they're seeing a massive, business opportunity there. And I've decided to look at some numbers, and you might find this very interesting. So remember, Spotify paid Joe Rogan $100 million, and we agree that's a lot of money. However, within 48 hours of Spotify announcing the fact that they had basically landed this deal with the Rogan podcast, their shares have absolutely skyrocketed. So in 48 hours, they went from $30 billion to $35 billion. So they gained $5 billion in 48 hours, out of which they paid $100 million to Joe Rogan.
Eclipses that 100 million, all right, isn't it? Seems like a sound investment.
$4.9 billion in 48 hours.
That's just unreal. What's that, 15% increase?
That really explains
15,
everything.
20, something like that?
I would say. So, yeah.
Anyway, I just bought shares on that day.
I found it really remarkable. To be honest, I couldn't really believe when I first read it. But
well, I wonder, given how many downloads he does have every month on Apple, whether those who listen to him regularly and avid fans, whether they'll just listen to all their podcasts on Spotify now. I'm guessing that's part of Spotify's strategy here, is to convert his listeners to listen to all their podcasts on Spotify. Whether that will happen or not, time will tell.
I have no doubt that he will pull some of his listenership or some of his audience over to Spotify. Absolutely, definitely. But the Howard Stern example is a really good example, because what happened there was that he lost a large chunk of his audience in this transition, because he went from a free show to a show that's behind a paywall. So people now had to subscribe to his show, and that lost him millions and millions of listeners. I mean, personally, I have to say I don't really care which platform a podcast is on. I listen to a lot of podcasts on the Apple Podcast platform, but I also listen to some stuff on Spotify. Although I have to say that I'm not, when I think of podcasts, I don't think of Spotify in the first instance. So that is, obviously something they are trying to change.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I think if they're bringing in video for him, that's not going to stay just him for long. It will expand, and they'll probably start showing. They'll have all their artists' music videos streaming on there as well. At some point, I've no doubt something like that will happen. But with podcasts, I stream my music. I use Spotify. That's where I get my music from. There's a huge argument to say, well, why not just have all my podcasts in there as well that I listen to? But this is just a slight aside, is I either want to listen to music or I'm listening to a podcast. I'm either in the frame of mind to do one or the other, not necessarily both. I know obviously you wouldn't be doing both at the same time.
How would you do that?
There is a little psychological aspect around it about going to your dedicated podcast app to go and listen to your podcast. There is something about that, particularly obviously if you're an iPhone user or Mac user.
Yeah, absolutely true.